Hello and welcome to Talk Solent, a show where we give our opinions on some of the news that's cropped up in the week. I'm Shan Robins, and joining us today is Graeme Clements, among many things an eco-warrior, who is the renewables product manager for Covers Builders Merchants. And also joining us is Hayley Hamlett, voluntary sector support development worker for One Community in Eastleigh. Now to our first story. Now this was online with Reuters on Thursday, and they're saying that oil prices recovered above $50 a barrel, bouncing back from the week's lows as the dollar weakens against major currencies. So what we think it means is that in reality oil prices have increased. Now Graeme, you work in a related industry. You know, what does this all mean, and what is the circumstances around that?
Well, increasing oil prices will affect all walks of life. Merchandise in shops, because of transport costs have increased, all merchandise in shops and all sorts of things will start going up in price. The worrying thing is that it's been forecast that the price increase will continue through the next 5 years. Now, we got as low as $30 a barrel this year, which was very, very low. It's now at about 50 to 55, and they're predicting it will go up to $70 a barrel, which means that inflation will increase purely because of the oil price.
And does that also mean that it might affect petrol prices?
Petrol prices, yes, and also people who use domestic oil for heating. Which is where I come in, because when this happens, people start getting much higher fuel bills to heat their homes, and they start to look at renewable technologies to heat their homes, such as air source heat pumps and biomass boilers.
So what are they, air source heat pumps? What are they?
So it's basically a unit that looks rather like an air conditioning unit that sits outside, but rather than push cold air into the house, it heats water. So you would then, instead of heating water using a boiler, you would heat it using an air source heat pump, and that would then heat your radiators or underfloor heating, whichever you have. But the advantage with it is it actually generates heat. So for every 1 kilowatt of energy you use to power it, you get 3.5 kilowatts of energy out. That's why it's a renewable technology. It works rather like your fridge, but rather than keeping the cold, it keeps the warmth. So your fridge, if you feel the back of your fridge, it'll be warm, while with an air source heat pump, it's cold, because it's keeping the heat.
It's the other way.
And biomass boilers are boilers which run on a solid fuel made from a natural product, usually sawdust, basically. So sawdust is made into pellets. That pellet acts like a fuel, because they're very small, acts like a liquid, and you can actually run your heating from a boiler run with pellets. The double side of that is that, first of all, the sawdust is a waste product anyway, so you are recycling.
I was going to say, are we not ruining trees for that?
No. It's a waste. In this country, because it's still fairly small business, the pellets are made from a recycled sawdust from sawmills and things like that. But the other thing is, it is carbon neutral, because it is renewable. You just plant more trees. And then where the technology is developed in other countries, on the continent and in Canada, they actually have forests for biomass. So they will grow fast-growing trees purely to cut them down to use for fuel, because it's better that than using fossil fuels, which of course you can't replace.
Right.
Well, not within a few million years.
Yes. Oh, that's quite interesting. I've not really heard of renewables like that before. Hayley, for you?
No, I hadn't. And only a few weeks ago, I went to the Titchfield Festival Theatre, and he's working on trying to make it the first theatre that is completely self-sufficient. Right. And he's fitted a boiler with wood fuel, wood pellets. Very big boiler, because of course it's a theatre. Very impressive, actually, and that's the first time I'd come across it.
So how did you know, from just going to the theatre and then finding out about that kind of, like what you say, behind the scenes stuff?
I mean, we've been involved with the theatre for a few years. My daughter was always acting there, and I wanted to find out what kind of volunteer support he needed, because that's what my role is. And so he gave me a tour around, and therefore I found out that he's trying to get this, he's putting solar panels in, he's going to recycle all the water. But that was the first time I'd ever heard about wood-related heating, and I saw it.
It's amazing.
Incredible. Yeah.
And for you, you're kind of like into sustainability and things like that. How did you get into that?
Well, I worked for Covers just in there. Well, I was a depot manager, and the board directors decided that eco was going to be the thing of the future. This was 10 years ago. And they decided they wanted a proper eco centre, not just a few posters, that we had to have working products and expertise. But of course there were no eco-experts anywhere. So they basically said to me, how would you like a change of direction in your career? I said, well, yeah, let's give it a go. And it was a bit slow to start because you're in an area, an industry, if you like, which really hadn't taken off at all. But we have now government subsidies, government grants and incentive schemes which will help you do this. So if you put an air source heat pump into your home, they will actually pay you quarterly for 7 years, which will cover most of the cost of the installation.
Wow.
So it is, and also with biomass. And if you have a biomass boiler in a commercial situation, you actually get payments for 20 years.
Wow.
Because it's good. To, not only are you saving fuel, saving fossil fuels, but at the moment you're still using what is essentially a waste product.
But for the average, say the household, and they get that support for 7 years, and so that it balances the initial outlay. But what about moving forward with the cost of then getting those products to heat the home? How comparable is it to the gas or electricity?
An air source heat pump is roughly the same running cost as a mainline gas boiler. So it's roughly the same, and biomass also is roughly the same as a gas boiler, which is the cheapest way of the common heating products.
But do you need more space in your house? You know, how
really.
does it look nice?
No. As I say, with an air source heat pump, it's just a unit outside, really. So you've got the metal box, which looks like an air conditioning unit, but you can disguise that. You can plant round it or whatever. As long as there's airflow getting to it, you can disguise it. But inside the house, no, not really. Nothing much, really.
Fascinating. Right. I'm sorry, that's all we've got time for on that, because we are now going to go and talk about something in France. Marine Le Pen has said this. This was on the BBC News, actually, about to find this online, the BBC News. No free school for foreigners in France. And I think that for me, this is quite a kind of worrying thing, where she is saying she's not been nominated as president yet, but it's part of her thing that she's saying is that anyone that goes there that's not local, as it were, will not be entitled to free school or anything else. And I think that's of concern, because I'm sure people will be in the country who are foreign for whatever reason they've been accepted there, and if they can't afford to go to school, the children will be uneducated. Hayley, would that concern you? I think it would concern me,
but I don't quite. Obviously, need to know more about it. But when you look at our country, comparing it to our country, and how many people we have here that haven't been born here, that would be a huge amount.
Yes.
And I don't know what the statistics are in France, but
I think there's quite a few.
I wonder why? Obviously, it's cost cutting. That maybe she's thinking, but.
Yes, I think it's to save money and to try and halt immigration, I would imagine, where people think they really need to be there rather than they choose the lifestyle of wanting to be there. But of course, I don't know. We don't know what that would then mean in reverse, whether other countries, including ourselves, might say the same, which would be horrifying. For me, and I certainly know in the African countries, education is the way out of poverty. So if you don't have access to that, how do you get out of poverty?
Because education is not all about English and maths either. It's social skills. So it's a much bigger picture than just the basic skills that are needed to find work. But I mean, if they weren't involved with the social side of skills and the right and wrong of schooling, then that has a huge impact on the communities.
Yes. So Graeme, do you have children that will have been through school?
Yes, children and grandchildren, yes. I think we should point out that this is from the National Front Party in France. So, I think for this country, I think we're way off of that kind of extremism. But it is a trend in Europe. The extremists have sort of taken a bit of a hold, so it could be a threat.
And this is the thing that I think at the moment she's quite neck and neck in the running to be the next president, which obviously ramifications throughout Europe of anything that they do.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But no, I think it is a typical of a nationalist type of policy, and it is about sort of reducing immigration and that kind of thing. And it's fairly sort of typical, I think, of that type of policy. Hopefully we won't see that in this country.
No, yes, for me, children are children. They need every opportunity.
Why were they there? It's not necessarily their choice.
Well, you'll create more problems by not educating people.
Yes, when people have opportunity. So back to the UK, and in the Portsmouth News, this was in there earlier, this week, and it's been on national news as well. Should drivers give way for cyclists when turning left? So this essentially is when you're coming up to a junction. A lot of drivers do this already. They look in their rear view mirror, check if something's coming up the inside, and before they turn. There have been some terrible accidents where one hasn't realised the other is turning or going straight forward, and they've collided. So I'm going to start with you, Graeme, and cyclists. Do you think that would work in Britain?
It's very hard to enforce, I would have thought, and the reason for it, I think, because when you are turning left, you look in the mirror, it's very difficult to judge how far away they are, especially at night time. You see a light, and of course some of the lights nowadays are not like they used to be. They're little flashing blue lights, and it's to try and determine if they are within a car's width or 2 or 3 cars width, very difficult to determine. So you could be at a junction looking, thinking, is that somebody there? And holding traffic up, other people getting impatient, road rage and all the rest of it, because you can't really see what's going on there. I mean, a bit different during the day. So I think it could cause a lot of issues, a lot of problems, rather than solving any problems.
Especially the change of... In Holland, they have managed to cut accidents by half for cyclists once they introduced this policy. What do you think, Hayley?
Well, I think, having been to Holland and seen the cycle paths there, they have a cycle path in practically every road. And I think when there is a cycle path, it's much easier to do it. But when there isn't one, which there isn't in a lot of our roads, and let's face it, they don't always use the cycle path when there is one anyway, then it's much harder, because we are always don't give way to the inside of the car. You know, we're not programmed to look that way. But when you are out in the road a little bit more and there's a cycleway, you're probably more likely to be aware.
More aware that it is one. I think it must be very difficult. Some cyclists where generally they are close to the pavement, but there's often sometimes, well, certainly where I come from, there's potholes, and so they're forced to move out, but then they're not out all the time, and it can be very difficult. But that, my only concern, I think it might, may well work, is that any cyclist needs to realise that actually. People who passed their test years ago may not remember, and it will take a while for that to filter through. So they'll need to, at the end of the day, if you're a cyclist or a motorcyclist, sad as it may seem, they have to be extra aware of that the car drivers may not see them. Right. If you want to let us know stories that we can be talking about, then do email us on talk@thatsolent.com. I give you that again, talk@thatsolent.com. Or you can tweet us using the hashtag TalkSolent. And coming up, we'll be talking about how you might be able to help the Citizens' Advice in Fareham.